What if the greatest betrayal in your life was never losing people, but desperately trying to keep them? And what if your loneliness is not a punishment, but a psychological transformation you were never prepared for? Stay with me, because by the end of this message, you'll understand why isolation often appears just before the most profound inner awakening, and why the absence of support may be forcing you to discover a power that cannot be borrowed from anyone else. Have you ever looked around and realized that the people you once depended on are gone? No calls, no messages, no one checking if you're okay. If you've experienced that, write "I stand alone" in the comments, not as a confession of defeat, but as a declaration that you're still standing. Because what you're about to hear may completely change the way you understand loneliness. If this message is helping you see your loneliness in a completely different light, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. There comes a moment in life when the noise disappears. The invitations stop arriving. The phone grows silent. Familiar faces drift away without explanation, and the comforting routines that once defined your identity begin to dissolve. Most people immediately interpret this experience as rejection. They believe they have somehow failed, become unworthy, or been forgotten. Yet this interpretation may itself be the greatest illusion. There are moments when life removes the crowd because the crowd has become a barrier between you and the person you are capable of becoming. Constant companionship can keep the deepest parts of the psyche asleep. As long as someone is always telling you who you are, what to think, or how to feel, there is little reason to confront your own inner world. Isolation has a peculiar way of exposing everything that conversation can hide. Without distractions, your fears grow louder. Old memories return uninvited. Regrets, anxieties, and hidden desires rise from the unconscious like figures emerging from a dark forest. This encounter is uncomfortable because the mind naturally seeks escape. It wants entertainment, approval, or another voice to silence the one within. But the very discomfort you wish to avoid contains the map toward genuine transformation. The personality that depended on applause begins to weaken. The version of yourself built upon acceptance slowly loses its authority. In its place, another self struggles to emerge, one that no longer measures worth through popularity or constant reassurance. This process feels like loss because the old identity does not surrender peacefully. It resists every change, convincing you that loneliness is proof of failure rather than evidence of growth. The paradox is that solitude does not create emptiness. It reveals what has always been present beneath the surface. Qualities that remained hidden beneath endless social demands begin to awaken. Patience grows where restlessness once ruled. Clarity replaces confusion. Courage quietly forms without witnesses. The silence that once felt unbearable gradually becomes a place where the authentic self can finally speak, free from the expectations that once drowned out its voice. One of the greatest illusions the human mind creates is the belief that strength comes from the people surrounding us. From childhood, we are taught that support is the source of confidence, that encouragement produces courage, and that approval confirms our worth. While healthy relationships are valuable, they can also become invisible crutches. The danger begins when your identity quietly depends on them. You no longer ask yourself what you truly believe. Instead, you wait for others to tell you whether your thoughts are acceptable, your decisions are wise, or your dreams are realistic. In that moment, your inner authority is surrendered without you even realizing it. This hidden dependence often remains unnoticed until life removes the very people you leaned upon. Friends become distant. Family cannot understand your path. Mentors disappear. Suddenly, every decision belongs entirely to you. At first, this feels terrifying because the mind has grown accustomed to borrowing certainty from others. Without familiar voices offering reassurance, doubt becomes overwhelming. You question every step, wondering whether you are capable of standing on your own. Yet this is precisely where an extraordinary transformation begins. The absence of external support forces you to search for something deeper than encouragement. You begin listening to a quieter voice that has always existed beneath the noise of public opinion. It does not shout, it does not seek applause, it simply speaks with honesty. This is the beginning of inner authority, a place where decisions are no longer made to avoid criticism or gain acceptance, but to remain faithful to your deepest convictions. As dependence fades, hidden abilities begin to surface. Problems that once seemed impossible become challenges you learn to solve yourself. Emotional resilience grows because there is no one else to carry your burdens. Discipline develops because excuses lose their audience. Confidence becomes rooted in experience rather than compliments. You discover that the strength you admired in others was never something they could give you. They merely reflected a potential that had always existed within you. The remarkable truth is that genuine power cannot be inherited, borrowed, or gifted. It is forged in the silent moments when no one arrives to rescue you, when every step forward is taken without applause, and when you realize that the foundation you were searching for in others has quietly been growing inside you all along. There is a kind of silence that most people fear more than failure itself. It is the silence that arrives when the distractions disappear, when conversations fade, and when there is nothing left to occupy the mind except its own hidden contents. Many spend their lives avoiding this silence because they instinctively sense what waits within it. Beneath the carefully constructed personality lies another world, a world of forgotten memories, denied emotions, buried fears, and desires that have never been fully acknowledged. This hidden dimension of the psyche does not vanish simply because it is ignored. It waits patiently, shaping choices from the shadows until the moment isolation brings it into the light. When you are constantly surrounded by people, it becomes easy to escape yourself. Endless conversations, entertainment, work, and social obligations create enough noise to keep the deeper parts of the mind asleep. You can convince yourself that everything is fine because there is always another distraction waiting. But solitude removes every convenient escape. Suddenly, thoughts you have avoided for years begin to return. Old wounds reopen. Regrets demand attention. Insecurities that were hidden beneath confidence begin to whisper with unexpected force. What feels like emotional chaos is often the unconscious insisting that it can no longer remain ignored. This encounter is uncomfortable because the hidden side of your personality rarely appears in a pleasant form. It reveals jealousy you denied, anger you suppressed, fear you disguised as caution, and pain you buried beneath achievement. The instinctive reaction is to reject these parts, believing they make you weak or unworthy. Yet what you refuse to acknowledge gains power over you. Every denied emotion quietly influences your decisions without your awareness. Every hidden fear shapes your future from behind the curtain of consciousness. Real transformation begins when you stop running from these uncomfortable truths. Instead of fighting them, you observe them with honesty. You ask why they exist, what created them, and what lesson they carry. As this hidden world becomes conscious, its grip begins to weaken. Fear loses its mystery. Shame loses its control. Emotional reactions become choices instead of automatic habits. The darkness within does not disappear, but it is no longer your master. It becomes a source of self-knowledge, revealing that the greatest battle has never been against the world outside you, but against the unseen forces within that have quietly directed your life for far too long. There is a profound difference between living according to your own convictions and living according to the expectations of others. Most people believe they are making independent choices, yet much of their lives are quietly shaped by the desire to be accepted. They choose careers that earn admiration instead of fulfillment. They remain in relationships that drain them because loneliness feels more frightening than dishonesty. They silence opinions that might invite criticism, convincing themselves that peace is better than authenticity. Over time, this constant search for approval becomes so natural that they mistake it for their own identity. They no longer know where their true voice ends and the voices of the world begin. This is why solitude can become one of the most powerful experiences a person ever faces. When external validation disappears, the masks that once seemed necessary begin to lose their purpose. There is no audience to impress, no applause to chase, and no expectations demanding obedience. At first, this feels deeply unsettling. Without someone confirming that you are doing the right thing, uncertainty grows louder. The mind begins asking difficult questions. Who am I when no one is watching? What do I genuinely believe when there is nobody to agree with me? Which dreams belong to me and which were borrowed from the expectations of others? These questions cannot be answered through conversation alone. They require silence, reflection, and the courage to disappoint people who have become comfortable with the version of you that always sought their approval. This is where inner authority begins to emerge. It is not arrogance or stubborn independence. It is the quiet confidence that comes from knowing your decisions are rooted in your deepest values rather than in temporary opinions. You stop asking for permission to become yourself. You no longer measure your worth by how many people approve of your path. As this inner authority grows, something remarkable changes. Fear of rejection begins to lose its control. Criticism becomes information rather than condemnation. Praise becomes pleasant but unnecessary. Your direction is no longer determined by popularity or consensus, but by an inner compass that remains steady even when others disagree. This does not make life easier, but it makes it far more authentic. The person who once searched endlessly for acceptance discovers a freedom that cannot be taken away, because it no longer depends on the changing moods, expectations, or approval of anyone outside themselves. One of the most painful experiences a person can endure is watching relationships fade without understanding why. Friends who once promised loyalty become strangers. Family members struggle to recognize the changes taking place within you. Conversations that once flowed naturally now feel forced and distant. The instinct is to chase what has been lost, believing that if you explain yourself well enough, everything can return to the way it was. But there are moments in life when the ending of certain relationships is not a tragedy to be prevented. It is a necessary consequence of becoming someone you were never allowed to be before. Every relationship is built upon a particular version of you. Some people know the child who sought approval. Others know the fearful person who avoided conflict. Some became comfortable with the version of you that always sacrificed personal truth to keep everyone happy. As long as you remained that person, the relationship felt stable because everyone understood the role you were expected to play. But genuine inner transformation quietly changes those roles. Your values shift. Your priorities evolve. You begin saying no where you once said yes. You stop apologizing for having boundaries. You become less interested in pleasing others and more committed to living honestly. This change can confuse those who benefited from the older version of you. They may believe you have become cold, selfish, or distant, when in reality you have simply stopped abandoning yourself for the comfort of others. Not every relationship can survive that kind of transformation because some connections were never rooted in authenticity. They were sustained by habits, expectations, or unspoken agreements that required you to remain the same person forever. Although losing these relationships feels deeply painful, the emptiness they leave behind creates space for something new. Without the pressure to perform familiar roles, you begin discovering qualities that had been suppressed for years. Curiosity replaces obligation. Confidence replaces people-pleasing. Peace replaces the exhausting effort of constantly managing other people's expectations. New relationships, when they eventually arrive, are no longer built upon the masks you once wore. They are formed around the person you have become through honesty and self-awareness. What once appeared to be abandonment gradually reveals itself as the clearing away of everything that could not accompany you into the next stage of your life. Pain has a remarkable ability to reshape the human soul. Most people spend their lives trying to avoid emotional suffering, believing that comfort is the path to peace. They distract themselves from disappointment, suppress grief, and escape loneliness whenever possible. Yet the experiences that wound us most deeply often become the very forces that awaken strengths we never knew existed. Emotional pain is not merely something to survive, it is raw psychological energy waiting to be transformed. The question is not whether you will suffer, but whether your suffering will become your prison or your greatest source of wisdom. When abandonment, betrayal, or isolation enters your life, the first instinct is to see yourself as broken. You replay conversations, search for mistakes, and wonder why you were left behind. The mind becomes trapped in endless questions that have no satisfying answers. This is where many people remain for years, allowing pain to harden into bitterness. They build emotional walls, distrust every new relationship, and slowly convince themselves that life has nothing more to offer. The wound never truly heals because it is constantly reopened by resentment. But there is another path. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" a deeper question begins to emerge. What is this experience demanding that I become? That single shift changes everything. The energy once spent chasing the past is redirected toward building the future. Loneliness becomes time for reflection. Rejection becomes motivation for growth. Failure becomes a teacher rather than a sentence. Every disappointment carries information about your fears, your attachments, and the parts of yourself that still depend on circumstances beyond your control. As this transformation unfolds, discipline quietly replaces emotional chaos. You begin mastering your reactions instead of being controlled by them. Compassion grows because you understand suffering from personal experience. Patience develops because healing cannot be rushed. The pain that once threatened to destroy your identity gradually becomes the foundation of a stronger one. You discover that resilience is not the absence of hardship, but the ability to shape hardship into character. The deepest wounds often become the birthplace of the greatest wisdom because they force you to confront truths that comfort never reveals. What once felt like unbearable loss becomes the fire that refines your spirit, teaching you that the most enduring strength is not found in a life without suffering, but in a heart that has learned how to transform suffering into purpose, clarity, and unshakable inner power. Every meaningful transformation demands a price, and one of the highest prices is the willingness to walk alone. There are paths in life that no companion, teacher, friend, or family member can travel for you. They may encourage you, offer advice, or stand beside you for a while, but there comes a point where the journey turns inward. Beyond that point, every answer must be discovered through your own experience. This is the stage that many people fear because it strips away the comfort of shared certainty. It forces you to leave behind familiar identities and step into a place where no map exists except the one unfolding within your own soul. Most people spend their lives identifying themselves through the groups they belong to. They define themselves by family expectations, friendships, careers, social status, or the opinions of those around them. These external identities provide comfort because they answer the question, "Who am I?" without requiring deep self-examination. But genuine psychological growth begins when those borrowed identities begin to fall away. The familiar roles no longer fit. The beliefs inherited from others begin to feel incomplete. A quiet dissatisfaction emerges, not because life has become meaningless, but because the old meaning can no longer contain the person you are becoming. This transition often feels like isolation because very few people understand it. Those around you may encourage you to return to the person you once were, simply because that version made them comfortable. They cannot see the inner struggle taking place. To them, nothing appears to have changed, yet within you an entirely different life is beginning to form. The old personality resists letting go, while the emerging self calls you toward greater honesty, responsibility, and wholeness. This inner conflict cannot be solved by seeking more approval. It can only be resolved by remaining faithful to the truth you continue discovering about yourself. Walking alone does not mean rejecting relationships or believing that independence is the highest virtue. It means recognizing that there are moments when no external voice can replace your own inner understanding. Every difficult decision, every painful realization, and every act of courage strengthens your connection to the person you are gradually becoming. The loneliness of this journey is not evidence that you have lost your way. It is often the clearest sign that you have stepped beyond imitation and into authenticity, where your life is no longer shaped by the expectations of the crowd, but by the quiet unfolding of your own deepest nature. There is a question that quietly follows every person through the darkest seasons of life. Who will save me? Sometimes we wait for the right friend, the perfect mentor, the ideal relationship, or a sudden opportunity that will finally change everything. We imagine that somewhere outside ourselves exists the answer to our struggles. This hope feels comforting because it allows us to postpone the difficult work of confronting our own potential. As long as we believe rescue is coming, we never fully discover the strength already waiting within us. Life, however, has a mysterious way of challenging this illusion. There are seasons when every source of support seems to disappear at once. The people you trusted become unavailable, doors close without explanation, advice no longer satisfies the questions growing inside you. At first, this feels unbearably cruel. You wonder why you have been abandoned at the very moment you need help the most. Yet what if this absence is not a punishment? What if it is the moment life stops carrying you because it is time for you to learn that you can walk on your own? This realization does not arrive with dramatic certainty. It unfolds quietly through ordinary moments. You solve a problem without asking for permission. You survive a disappointment you once believed would destroy you. You make difficult decisions without needing everyone's approval. Each challenge becomes evidence that you possess far more strength than you ever imagined. Slowly, dependence gives way to self-trust. Fear begins to lose its authority because experience has proven that you can endure more than you once believed possible. The person who emerges from this process is profoundly different from the one who entered it. They no longer wait for perfect conditions before acting. They no longer measure their future by the number of people standing beside them. Their confidence is no longer borrowed from encouragement, praise, or external validation. It is rooted in lived experience, in the knowledge that they have faced uncertainty, loneliness, and hardship without surrendering their identity. This kind of confidence cannot be taken away because it was not given by anyone else. Perhaps the greatest paradox of human growth is that the person you spent years searching for has been quietly forming beneath every disappointment, every unanswered prayer, and every lonely night. The guide you longed to meet, the strength you hoped someone would lend you, and the wisdom you believed belonged to others were never truly outside you. They were patiently waiting for the moment when you stopped looking toward the world for rescue and finally turned inward, discovering that the most powerful force in your life was never another person, but the awakened self that had been waiting for your trust all along. The greatest mistake you can make is believing that your loneliness is proof that your life has lost its meaning. Sometimes life grows quiet because something within you is trying to speak for the first time. When friends disappear, when help never arrives, and when every familiar source of comfort is stripped away, it may feel as though everything valuable has been taken from you. Yet beneath that emptiness, another process is unfolding, one that cannot happen in the noise of constant approval or the safety of dependence. The person you have always been is slowly giving way to the person you were meant to become. Look back at every chapter we have explored. Isolation was never presented as an enemy, but as an invitation to discover your authentic self. The loss of support forced hidden strength to awaken. The silence revealed the unconscious patterns that had quietly controlled your life. Solitude taught you to trust your own judgment instead of seeking endless validation. Relationships that no longer matched your growth naturally fell away, making space for a new identity. Emotional pain transformed into discipline, wisdom, and resilience. The lonely road became the path of genuine psychological transformation, and finally you discovered that the rescuer you had been waiting for was never outside you. This does not mean you will never need people again. Human connection remains one of life's greatest gifts, but there is a profound difference between sharing your life with others and depending on them to define your worth. Once you discover your inner foundation, relationships become expressions of wholeness rather than attempts to fill an inner emptiness. You no longer fear being alone because you have learned that solitude and abandonment are not the same. One weakens the spirit, while the other has the power to reveal it. So if you find yourself walking through a season where no one seems to understand you, where the phone remains silent, where every step forward feels like it must be taken without applause, do not rush to conclude that life has forgotten you. Some of the most significant transformations happen where no audience exists. The strongest roots grow in darkness before anyone sees the tree. The brightest stars become visible only when the sky is completely black. Perhaps this lonely chapter is not the ending you feared, but the beginning you never expected. Perhaps every closed door, every painful goodbye, and every unanswered cry has been leading you toward the one relationship that can never betray you, the relationship with your own awakened self. And once that foundation is built, you will discover a truth that very few people ever fully understand. The person who no longer fears standing alone becomes impossible to control, impossible to break, and capable of walking through life with a quiet strength that no circumstance can ever take away. If this message spoke to something deep within you, let it stay with you long after this video ends. Reflect on it in silence. Return to it when loneliness whispers that you have been abandoned. And remember this above all else. Sometimes the universe removes every hand from your shoulder because it is teaching you to stand with your own. The moment you stop waiting to be rescued is the moment you begin discovering the extraordinary power that has been waiting inside you all along.